Hi, welcome. In this video, I'm going to go over some sample solutions for the midterm exam. So let's get started. All right, so this first question, you need to write a prototype, a definition, and a function call for an integer function that has one IF stream reference parameter, one integer reference parameter, and it's an integer function. That means it returns an integer. All right, so let's just first do the prototype. So if you're going to do the prototype for this function, it's just a single statement. It has an integer return type. The name of the function, I can just call this function. You can name it whatever you want. It has one IF stream reference parameter, and it has one integer reference parameter. So this is a function declaration or prototype. So it's just going to be a single statement with a semicolon. And then it says to add the precondition. The precondition indicates an understanding of what must be true before you can use this function. So I didn't say postcondition, I just said precondition. So what must be true in order to use this function? In order to use this function, you must have a file stream. So you must have connected. Well, first of all, you must have an IF stream variable because the reference parameter requires a variable. That means it has an address. And you also, because we're going to be reading from a file, it must be connected to a file. And we also need to have an integer variable for the other reference parameter, And we need to have a place for we need to have an integer for the return. Now sometimes you can just you could print it onto the screen. It doesn't really say, so you don't have to have an integer for the return. You could also just print the return, but you need to be aware that you need to be able to process and do something with the integer that's going to be returned from this function. But the most important preconditions are you must have an IF stream variable because this is a reference parameter. You must be connected to an input file because you're going to read from the input file, and you must have an integer variable for this reference parameter. So that's a sample solution for the prototype. So now let's do a sample solution for the definition. So I'm going to erase this and do a sample solution for the definition. If this erases. All right, so the definition. All right, so now we did the prototype, and now let's do the definition. The definition, we're going to have an integer return type. We call it function. It has an IF stream reference parameter. This is my ampersand. We do need to name the variables because we're going to be using them inside of the function. I'm going to use the year for this reference parameter. So the first thing, we're going to assume that we're already connected to the file. So all we need to do for the year is we need to read in from the file into the year. When we do that, that's going to set this value, and that's going to return that integer. Then we need to have an integer for the dollar value. And we're going to read into that dollar value. And we're going to return that dollar value. So it's going to return two integers. It returns this one by reference, and it returns this one by the return type. All right, now let's do the function call from main. So we have our main function. So we need to have an IF stream variable. We need to, this is an object of, actually it's a variable object of type IF stream. We're going to use the member function open. I'm just going to call it file.txt. I didn't tell you what it needed to be named. And we're going to have a couple of integers. We'll have an integer for the year and an integer for the dollar value. So now we can call our function. We can say dollar value equals our function, and we will pass to it our file stream that is connected, and we will pass the year. So this would be the function call. This is a pass by reference file stream. This is a pass by reference integer, so those must be variables. When that function returns, it will return an integer and it'll get assigned right here. So that's all it says you need to do for that question. And that would be an example of the function call. Next question. So we have a structure. The name of our struct is called bike, and it has some member variables. It has an integer, two doubles, and a string. So this says to implement a double function. So the return type is double. The name of the function is profit. This function takes two reference parameters. So we have an IF, and this is implement. So this is going to be a function definition. So you need to put the names of your variables. This is my ampersand. And two reference parameters. So it also has a bike reference parameter. I will call that rec. So those are my two parameters. So now what are we going to do? We just need to read what it's going to do. It's going to read all the data about a bike from the file. So you're going to assume that the file has the data and it's in order: model, cost, price, and company. So we're just going to, we're already connected to the file, so we just read into rec.model. The next item will read into rec.cost. The next item will read into rec.price. And the next one will read into rec.company. So we're going to assume that it's going to read into the data in order. So once we read the data in order, then we will be able to finish the rest of the function. So to finish the rest of the function, we will, what do we have to do? We need to print the company onto the screen and return the profit. So in order to print the company onto the screen, we will print out rec.company. And to return the profit, we will return rec.price minus rec.cost. And if you don't want to do this all in one line, which I don't ever recommend doing it all in one line, I think it's better to read in each piece of data just to make sure there's no errors. You would just read into rec.model, read into rec.cost, read in rec.price. These are semicolons because they're all separate statements. I just don't have the space. Rec.company. All right, let's move on to the next question. We're using the same struct bike here, In this one, we have a void function. So it's a void function. The name of the function is kids bike. This function has one value parameter, so it has a bike record. You will notice I do not have the ampersand. I could call this record. It doesn't really matter. This is not a reference parameter. It's a pass by copy or a value parameter. That means the precondition for this is that there must be a bike record, and that bike record must have information in it. All right, so what are we going to do with this? We're going to read in, no, we're not going to read anything in because we take our bike record. We're going to write the model and the price from a bike record only if the model is less than or equal to 125. So we're going to have to check if our record dot model is less than or equal to 125. Then we're going to print onto the screen the record dot model, and we'll also print the record dot price, and that's it. If the model is not less than or equal to 25, the function basically won't do anything. If you wanted to be complete, you could say else it's not valid, but this is not required for our not a kid's bike. Obviously, this is not required for the question. I just added it to be complete. Next question. Next question, we want to set the model, right? So we have a bike record and we have a value that's going to be the model. So we're going to take our bike record by reference and we're going to set that field with this value. So let's set the model. So we have some model that we're giving to the function, and we have this is a record or a object, or actually an instance of type bike, and then we have this value that we're going to set it. So all you have to do here is you have to go to Modo1 dot model, and you're going to set that value from this value that's being passed to the function. And that's setting, we could pass more than one value, or you could have different things, or you could set it with user input. But in this case, we have a value here. This is a pass by value. This is a pass by reference. So you're just going to get that this value, say it's a 125, and you're going to set it to this object of type bike. Now we want to get one. So this is the same kind of concept, except instead of setting something, you're getting something. So we're just going to return it. You're going to assume it's already been set, because if you notice, it takes a pass by value bike. So if it's a pass by value bike, this must have a value. And we're just going to return that value. It's an integer. So we're going to return Modo1 dot model that is of type integer. So you will see that this right here is an integer, and it matches the return type of the function. Next question. Implement an integer function whose header is given below. So this is an integer function. It has the name of the function is count, and it takes one integer parameter. So this function is going to take in a number, and it's going to return. It's going to ask the user to enter characters, and it's going to count how many characters the user enters, and it's going to return that number of characters. But the only catch is it's not going to count an asterisk or a hashtag. So the function has an integer return type. The name of the function is count. It has a parameter called number. So hopefully I have enough room for this. It's going to use a loop and get characters one by one from the user. And so I'm going to use a for loop. So I'm going to say for I equals 0, I less than number, I plus plus. That's how many times it says it's a counting loop, and that's how many times the loop is going to go. I'm going to ask the user, see out, enter. Obviously, it would be a better prompt, enter a character. And then I'm going to put it on the same line just because I don't have space here. See in. All right, so I need to have a character for that. So I'll have a char let. So I'm going to see in. That's the name of my character. So that's the first part. So I'm going to get that many characters from the user. So now I have to count how many characters are not an asterisk or an ampersand. So I'm going to have another variable. I'll just call it num, initialize it to 0. So I'm just going to do it in a very straightforward, easy way. I'm going to say if let does not equal asterisk, then num plus plus. If, and you could do it more than one way. You could do it with logical and possibly, but I'm just going to do it straight up each one. And I feel that this would work if let does not equal hashtag num plus plus. So let's see if that would work. So if the letter is not an asterisk, it's going to add 1. If the letter is not a hashtag, it's going to add 1. So if the user were to enter an A, it's going to get this letter, and it's not an asterisk, so it's going to count is 0. It's not an asterisk, so count will go up to 1. But look at this, it's checking this and it's also checking this. So that means for each character that comes in, it's going to count it twice. So that's not a good solution. So let's try something else here. And sometimes you have to try things and think about it first and test it and go through it. And that's kind of how I grade. I grade by double checking and trying to find, some counter solution or something that's going to make it not work right. Sometimes I can't find it. Sometimes you have to test it. So I think it would be better to say if let does not equal asterisk and let does not equal hashtag, right? So this is saying it's not an asterisk and it's not a hashtag, then we're going to add 1 to num. But if it is an asterisk or if it is a hashtag, we will not add 1 to num. After we've gone through all of ours, then we will return the num. So again, logically, this sounds right to me. We can test it with some values. So if num here is a 0 and we enter an A, we test, we get an A. A is not an asterisk and A is not a hashtag, so we will add 1 to num. Num will become 1. Now we enter a hashtag. Let does not equal this, that is true. Let does not equal this, this is not true. Hashtag does not equal hashtag is false, which means we will not add 1 to num. So I think that this is a solution that will most likely give me the correct count. All right, let's go to the next one. This one says implement a main function and use all of these, call all of these functions. So you need to recognize that this function, if it's a reference parameter, it needs to have a variable. If it's a value parameter, it needs to have a value. So here's my main function. I'm going to go through step by step for each one. So my first function, is going to return an integer, so I'm going to, and I have to pass it an int variable, and I have to pass it 2 doubles. I can pass it the same doubles twice. Now one thing is when you, actually I don't want to use bad names because bad names tend to get confusing. So I'm going to call this double num and int num and double value and value 2. All right, so now I can say int result equals, I'm going to call function 1 and I can pass it this integer variable, this double variable, and this other double variable. So that I took care of that function. Now this other function has to take an integer value. Now I could take this value that was returned because the function 1 is going to return a value. So I actually have a value. So I could say double result 2 equals function 2 and pass it result 1 because this is a pass by value parameter and I actually get a value from function 1. I don't have to do that. I could pass a literal here, but I'm going to kind of keep it a little connected, so that's how I'm doing it. All right, so I did function 2. Function 3, these need to be values and it's going to return a value and this needs to be a variable. So I'm going to go double result 3 equals function 3 and I'm going to pass an integer variable. So I have an integer variable called num and I need to pass 2 double values. So I'm going to pass 2.5 and 3.5. Those are values. These are values. Again, this is not the only way to do it. I'm just, trying some different things. All right, this character needs to be a value, this double needs to be a value, and this string needs to be a value. So I'm out of space, so I'm going to call function 4. I'm going to pass a string, a literal string for a literal string value, a literal character for a literal character value, and a literal double for a literal double value. The alternative for function 4 is I could have done string n equals name, char let equals x, double number equals 44.5, and then I could have called function 4 and passed it variables that have values, n, let, and number. There are a lot of different answers to this, so this would be an alternative to that. Obviously, that's not inside the main. This is just an alternative, just to show you. You don't have to pass literal values. I just kind of ran out of space in my main. So this is an example of passing a literal value. This is an example of declaring a variable, giving it a value, and then passing it. All right, next question. All right, so this is a question that's going to it's going to take by reference a guess game. So the function takes a by reference guess game, has a void return type. You're going to set up a player because, I didn't want you guys to have to write too much, so I only made you set up part of a player. Takes by reference an object of type game. It's still a struct, but so it's an instance. So you're going to ask and get. So you're going to ask them to enter name. Then you're going to get from the user the name. It's going to go into game dot name. And then you're going to ask for the next one. Enter the level. And then it's going to read in game dot level. So this is setting up a player by getting the user input. All right, so hopefully this helps you understand more about these questions on the midterm game. Of course, at any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.